You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall in New York.
And me, Charles Foley in Minneapolis. Welcome back, John. You have just returned from Chad. So
I have, Charles. Thank you. I am still recovering. It was a big, long trip, as you know. It was fabulous, an incredible country, spectacular wildlife and scenery, real adventure. We saw 66 at least species of mammals. I'm busily looking at gerbils in my spare time to see if I can get a few more species out of there. But I'll talk about it all in a bit more detail in another episode. And how are you? What's been happening?
All well over here. It has gone from being depths of winter to middle of summer in the space of about 4 days, which takes some getting used to. But so I was actually reading a really interesting article in the New York Times about the latest tiger count in India, which shows that there are now about 3,200 tigers in the country. And I remember hearing a lot as a kid about Project Tiger. So, and this was started in India in the early 1970s to really try to protect the last remaining tigers in the country, where the total population was only about 1,800 individuals. And the crazy thing is that the reason tigers were disappearing in India was not because of habitat loss so much, but because they were being shot by trophy hunters. And in fact, in this New York Times article, there's a photo of the Queen of England and her husband, Philip, standing next to a dead tiger that Philip had just shot on his trip to India. And that was only in 1961. And at that time, it was obviously totally acceptable to shoot one of the few remaining tigers. But the good news is that through Project Tiger, the Indian government has drastically increased anti-poaching measures and greatly expanded both the number and the size of reserves with tigers in them. And back in the 1970s, there were only 9 tiger reserves covering about 5,500 square miles. And now there's 53 reserves, which cover almost 29,000 square miles. So, and that's, almost 2.5% of India's total area. So that's a huge change. And what's interesting is that the tiger numbers have increased to the point where India is now actually thinking of sending tigers to other Asian countries. And in fact, is actually in talks with the Cambodian government to send tigers over there where they are now extinct.
Wow.
And the other interesting element to me from this article was the fact that it was the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, who released these figures. So obviously he has taken a huge amount of interest in conservation. And in fact, he also presided over the release of cheetahs, which are now being reintroduced into Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh, which we talked about in one of the podcasts many months ago, and which seems to be causing a lot of interest in the Indian press. But usually it's a very good thing for conservation when the head of state so obviously gets behind an initiative such as this, and hopefully the numbers of both tigers and cheetah will continue to grow in India.
I hope so. How fascinating. Well, Charles and I are very, very excited and pleased to introduce Arnaud Desbiez onto the podcast. In 2006, the first time I went to Brazil, I was in the Pantanal and I stopped at a gas station, and there on the side of the register was a Polaroid picture of this enormous armadillo on the road, and I sort of looked at it and my heart missed a beat, and I said to my guide, what on earth is that? And she talked to the person behind the register, and it was a giant armadillo, a tatu canastra. I go, oh my God, where can we see those? And she goes, oh, no one ever sees those. They're incredibly rare. You'll never see one, but aren't they amazing? So I sort of gave up hope of ever seeing this animal, but it was very much the top of my bucket list. A few years later, I was going back to Brazil, and I heard rumors that there was this biologist in the Pantanal had a project studying giant armadillos, and perhaps we could visit and see one. And the rest is history. So in 2013, I went to Baía das Pedras and I met Arnaud Desbiez, and he showed me a giant armadillo. Now, Arnaud is was born in France, but he grew up in the US. He has a PhD in biodiversity management. He's worked and lived in Belize, Argentina, Bolivia, Nepal, but he's been in Brazil for the past 20 years, where he founded an NGO called ICAS, ICAS, the Wild Animal Conservation Institute. And he's looking after the two projects he coordinates there, the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program and his Anteaters and Highways project. You may have met him in the field. You may have seen him on television or in media. He's been in National Geographic, BBC Nature, and was even in a 60-minute documentary on PBS that David Attenborough narrated. He lives in Campo Grande in Mato Grosso do Sul in Brazil with his wife, 2 teenagers, and 4 dogs. Arnaud, it's so nice to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, John. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's fun speaking to you after all these years.
It's great.
Yeah, welcome, Arnaud. It's wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Charles. It's good to see you too.
So, Arnaud, maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about how you became interested in wildlife, in biology, and how you ended up becoming a biologist working in Brazil.
Well, Charles, I think like most of the people in my field, I was fascinated by wild animals ever since I was a child. And I guess I did, as most of these kids, collected the birds and insects and what have you collecting at home. And I've always been really interested in wildlife and wild animals. And when I was 16, my first job was as first summer job was as a zookeeper. And that contact with wildlife was absolutely life-changing. And then I first started my career working in a zoo, in between going to university, in between university. And one thing led to another. I worked on different projects, ended up in Brazil for my PhD, and was working with a government research institute here. But I was always interested in armadillos. Armadillos were always a species that interested me. I grew up part of my life in the United States, and I remember in this TV show program, they always had what is a 3-banded armadillo, and I always found that amazing. When I worked in Bolivia, I worked on 9-banded armadillos. So when I arrived in the Pantanal in 2002, I knew that this was that giant armadillos were found there. So I was really excited to try to see one. My PhD research was on the impact of feral pigs on the community of peccaries, the 2 native species of peccaries. And I did all kinds of work for that, including walking line transects. So walked over 2,000 kilometers of line transects. And in 8 years living and working in the Pantanal, I had never seen a giant armadillo. Mm. So when my wife, Patricia, who coordinates a long-term project on tapirs, saw a giant armadillo at Bahia das Pedras, I thought, oh my goodness, I want to see this animal. So I went out there and I placed a few camera traps, and I was able to place them in front of burrows. It took a while, but I got my first picture of a giant armadillo, and that picture really changed my life because I was absolutely hooked. When I saw that first image, I could not believe that, this giant animal, this prehistoric looking animal actually existed, and it existed underneath my feet for all this time. Giant armadillos are solitary, nocturnal, and occur at low densities. So they spend all day deep underground in these burrows, and they only come out at night for on average 5 to 6 hours, and to feed on ants and termites. So you never get to see them because they're strictly nocturnal. And so seeing that picture, I knew that I wanted to learn more about them, because when I read in the literature, I tried to find out more about them. There was just nothing about them, only anecdotal stories. And this is a species that is actually pretty widespread in South America. They occur from Venezuela to northern Argentina, basically everything east of the Andes. And so that means that they occur in, the Amazon, Cerrado, a dry Chaco, so all sorts of biomes. And yet, they've never really had a real long-term study. so then I stopped the work I was doing, and I started the Giant Armadillo Conservation, what was actually the Giant Armadillo Pantanal project. And when I was at that stage, I had hired a vet, and I had another biologist working with me. So Danilo Cuiro and Gabriel Masucato working with me. And that's when we met John. So John came, it was really at the beginning of the project. And he was our first mammal watcher. I didn't even know these people existed.
Was I really the first? Oh, how special.
You were the first. Well,
You always remember your first.
You always remember the first. It was very special. And we were nervous at first, because are we going to be able to show this man who traveled from so far away? Will we be able to show him a giant armadillo? Luckily, at that moment, we were studying my favorite armadillo, Isabel, which we've been studying since 2011. Mm-hmm. And Isabel, I think, was with Alex, right, John, when you came to visit? I think she had a pup.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah.
And this was actually her second pup, but this was her pup, and we knew, because we were like, she was the only animal we were monitoring, so we were monitoring her, every day, which burrow during the night, and we knew that she nursed her pup. At that point, the pup was a little bit older, but every couple of days she had to go back and nurse it. Mm-hmm. So we knew where she had slept the night before, and we knew where Alex was, where her pup was. Yeah. So when John came to visit, we sort of guessed that she would have to cross this large area, this open area. And so I remember we drove at night. We didn't really know if this would work out with the telemetry equipment.
Exactly.
And do you remember, John, we heard actually a puma vocalize?
We heard pumas, and we didn't even stop. We didn't even slow down.
I remember you guys wanted to stop. I was like, no,
no.
Isabel, focus, the giant armadillo. Exactly. Everybody wanted to see the puma. And I was like, leave that cat alone. We want to go for Isabel. And then, it was very lucky. Isabel crossed exactly where we were hoping she would cross, and John got to see her.
You predicted it. And then we saw another armadillo. Remember the team had caught one. They just found one walking free, and they got it. They grabbed it.
So that was very lucky. That armadillo was Daisy. Yeah. And that was my wife's taper project that was monitoring tapers, and they caught a giant armadillo. That never really happens. And so John was actually very lucky, brought us luck. And we caught Daisy, who in the future, we would realize through genetics that she is Isabel's mother.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
And just so you know, John, Isabel is still with us today. We now monitor her through camera traps. And we have, because we haven't collected but the last camera traps we collected in January, there she was, looking absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. So Isabel, when we first met her in 2011, she had already bred, and we could tell that from her teats. But we also caught a young male a few years later that was her son. So we know that she already had at least one pup. And so we now, and throughout the years, we did a study on electroejaculation of males and doing ultrasounds of their testicles, because testicles of giant armadillos are inside. We realized that giant armadillos reach sexual maturity only between 7 and 9 years of age. So Isabel is now estimated to be around 20 years old, and she looks absolutely fantastic.
Wow.
And does anyone know, is there any information at all on their longevity?
Well, I hope Isabel is the one who's going to teach us that. There was almost no information, Charles, on these animals, but their growth rate, their population, their characteristics are pretty similar to elephants. Actually, they have one pup every 3 to 4 years, reach sexual maturity between 7 and 9 years of age, and so it would be very much expected that they live, maybe 25 years. And just like elephants, there's great, amazing parental care. They are great mothers, and that's why when John was visiting, we were documenting that parental care with Alex, and so this and So this is a species that not only is really rare and occurs at low population densities, but it is a species that cannot withstand any losses. So hunting, roadkill, fire, habitat loss, the removal of every individual has a huge impact on the population. This is not a species that can recover really easily. And the saddest part of all this is that because it's a species that you don't see, they're practically a ghost species, it means that they can disappear without anybody noticing.
Yeah. And they're also an extraordinarily important species for the ecosystem. I know that's some of the work you've done.
Absolutely. So when I first started the project, I got my first picture of a giant armadillo. At first, I was getting, because I placed the cameras in front of burrows, I was getting lots of images of animals going in and out of the burrows, using the burrows. So immediately, one of the first things we documented in the Pantanal was the important role of giant armadillos as ecosystem engineers. Now, what that means is that giant armadillos modify the environment, providing new resources for other species. In this case, the new resource is a burrow. Giant armadillos' burrows can be up to 5 meters deep and about 30 to 40 centimeters wide. The classic example of an ecosystem engineer is found where Charles is living in Minnesota, and that is the beaver, which builds dams that modifies the ecosystem and creates lakes and gives new resources to lots of species. Well, that's what giant armadillos do. These burrows, we have now documented over 80 species using giant armadillo burrows
80.
As a refuge against extreme temperatures. So when it's really hot outside, it's cool in the burrow. And when it's really cold or cool outside, it's warm. It's always about 25, 26 degrees inside the burrow. It's a place for foraging because the giant armadillo breaks roots and stuff. So there's rich insect life. So animals go in to feed. It's a refuge against predators. And also because lots of species use it, of course, it also attracts predators. And I have a master's student finishing right now who's actually looking at the influence of giant armadillo burrows on invertebrates. So that should be interesting. So basically, here's a species we knew nothing about, and yet plays such an important part, such an important role in the ecosystem.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I see a paper coming on of the similarities between elephants and armadillos. That would be a fun one to write. But why are they so rare? And what are the main threats that face the species generally?
Well, first of all, I think they are naturally rare. This is a species that occurs naturally at low density. And the Pantanal is, because it's such a relatively pristine environment, is where the highest populations of giant armadillos have been documented by us. And that's about 7 individuals every 100 square kilometers. That's about the density of a large predator, such as a jaguar. So they're naturally rare, but they're also very threatened by habitat loss. We have documented, our work in the Pantanal has shown that they need forested areas for foraging, for their food resource, but also and especially for reproduction. The burrows that they use to give birth and raise their pups are always found in forested areas, and pups forage principally and mainly in forested areas. So forested areas are key to their survival. Another threat, of course, is hunting. And people don't usually go out to hunt a giant armadillo because it's really rare and difficult to find. However, if they do see one, they will kill it because it's just a very large armadillo. The main armadillo that's hunted in Brazil and in South America is the 9-banded armadillo. The tatu galinha in Portuguese is actually called the chicken armadillo. And that's because it's tasty. People like to eat it. And so if they see a giant armadillo, they'll just, they'll kill it because it's a big source, it's a lot of protein. Remember, these animals can weigh 40 to 50 kilos. I don't think I mentioned this, so they're about 1.50 meters from the point of the tip of their nose to the tip of the tail. So that's about 1.50 meters, 5 feet. And they can weigh about 40 to 50 kilos. That's about 80 pounds. So it's about the size of a Labrador retriever. So you can imagine that for hunting, it's just a very big armadillo. And just to compare with the giant armadillo and the nine-banded armadillo, which is the most hunted, nine-banded armadillos, they have 4 pups, actually quadruplets, identical pups every year. So in 3 years, they will produce 12 pups, and the giant armadillo 1. And so you can really see that the population growth rate, just the characteristics are so different, and so giant armadillos can go extinct much more easily.
How long does the pup stay with? Sorry, just to interrupt you there. How long does the pup stay with the mother?
It depends exclusively on its mom's milk for the first 9 months of its life. Then it'll start foraging. We have seen them start building their own burrows when they're about 15 months of age, and then they'll stay in their mom's territory for about 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
Wow.
But once they're about 18 months, 20 months, 24 months, they become much more independent. Mom and pup will still sleep together in the same burrow sometimes, but they're mostly independent. The pup will stay in mom's territory until it's 3 or 4 years, and then it'll disperse.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted. You were talking about fire.
So then another threat, of course, is fire, and that is that's a really tricky threat because it's hard to measure. Because giant armadillos stay in their burrows, they often die inside the burrow, where they will be, suffocated, or it's hard to document. However, in the past 13 years, we have documented the death due to fire of 3 giant armadillos. So that's a pretty big number.
And so with the fires, you say that they asphyxiate in their holes. They don't just.
They asphyxiate, or what we saw one of the females was so damaged, we believe. So we tried to treat her every 2-3 months, capture her, give her antibiotics, do whatever we could. She had burns, but I probably inhaled a lot of smoke.
Right.
And so she slowly died.
Tragic.
So these are animals that are hard to count. And actually, so fire, you might remember in 2020, we had some massive fires in the Pantanal. And so 80% of the funding from the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program comes from zoos and aquariums in North America. And a lot of our zoo partners got really worried about the fires and said, we want to help. So at first we collected money and we bought equipment for animal rescue centers that were rescuing animals. And so we would ask them, what do you need? And then we would buy it and deliver the equipment. This way we were trying to help. But what we realized is that most of the animals rescued from the fires ended up dying. And so we talked with Rita, and John, you might remember the owners of the ranch, Rita and Carlos.
Yes, yeah.
And so we asked her, Rita, what can we do? And she said, look, we see now, because there are all these firefighters combating fires in the Pantanal, but, we, the people who live in these remote areas, they never come here to fight fires, and we don't have the kind of equipment that they have. And so what we did is we created the first community firefighting brigade in the Nyakwalanja region in traditional cattle ranches. And so we started in 2021 with 7 ranches, and now we have 15 ranches that cover 1,500 square kilometers all around our study area, where the ranches are fully trained to combat out of control fires. So that means that they can slow the fire down before it becomes, or stop it before it becomes out of control and burns everything. And this is a job that we do every year. Every year we retrain everybody in the different communities in the ranches. We train them on firefighting, and then just to make it more fun, we always add a little training course. Like last year we did a first aid course. This year we're planning to do a course on recognizing species of snakes and which ones are dangerous and what you do in case of a snake bite and these kinds of things. Because with the fires, you get lots of snakes.
Yeah.
And is the Pantanal traditionally a fire-maintained ecosystem, or what traditionally maintained the open areas?
So that's a really interesting question, and I know, Charles, you're probably you're used to a savanna ecosystem, and fire is part of the ecology of a savanna ecosystem. But what maintains the open areas, and what maintains and shapes the landscape in the Pantanal is water, is the flooding. The Pantanal is the world's largest freshwater wetland. And so right now we've had 3 years of drought, and this year we're having a flood again, finally, a big flood, which means that all the low areas are completely flooded, which means that no trees grow there. So all these expanses of grasslands exist due to flooding. And so it's that dynamic between, you have a wet season with extreme flooding and then a dry season with extreme droughts. And it's that dynamic that shapes the landscape, the Pantanal. However, fire has been traditionally used by cattle ranchers as a tool to manage grasslands, to get regrowth of grass, which is better for the cattle, to get rid of weeds and ticks. And so it is used as a traditional land management tool. However, these practices, which were a little older, are getting lost. The old timers, they knew exactly when you could light a fire, which is at the beginning of the rain season, when the forested areas retain the moisture and humidity, but the open area is a bit less. So you can burn there, but the fire will not go in the forest. And you do that when the first rains arrive, so you never have out of control fires. Unfortunately, that's not what we've been seeing more recently, and a lot of these fires were of criminal fires that were in 2020. A lot of them were criminal fires.
Wow. And so, what do the giant armadillos do when it floods? What do they just swim, or what's their defense mechanisms there?
So the giant armadillos are actually more of a dry land species, right? They occur in the Chaco. They occur, so they're super dry, Chaco and the Cerrado. And in flooded areas such as the Amazon and Pantanal, they occur in areas that don't completely flood.
Okay.
So for example, in the Nicolandia, where we work, it's really a mosaic habitat, and there were lots of islands, and the forested areas are always areas at higher elevation, a bit of higher elevation, and forested areas don't flood. So all the grasslands flood, but not the forested areas. So the giant armadillos will seek refuge in the higher areas, and so it's not like they have to move very far. They're in their home ranges. They have these different landscapes, these different microhabitats, right? Forested areas and open areas, and their favorite habitat actually is what we call Murundu Islands, which are these little islands of vegetation, usually with a termite mound, Cerrado type vegetation, and they're usually like a little island, big mound, and that's where they usually like to dig, right under the termite mound. That's like their favorite habitat.
Oh, fascinating animals.
Yeah, aren't they? And I remember there's plenty of that habitat in Baix das Pedras, from what I remember, those islands. Now you've been looking for them for so long. Is Baix das Pedras still a particularly good place, or did you just get lucky to find a place with such great management and owners?
I think Nicolandia is a good place. Paraguay's, there are a few places in the Pantanal that are really good for the giant armadillo to try to find them. But this is the kind of species that requires intense long-term work if you want to do anything. And what we're really lucky is that Baix das Pedras supports the project by giving us room and board for free for all these years. So we had a place to stay and food, which means with the cowboys, that means that that just saves our logistics, not having to bring our food, not having to cook, not being in tents. As you know, Charles, I mean, that takes up so much of your time, just managing a camp, the tents and cooking food and all that. So we don't have to do that. So in that sense, that's why we're so lucky to be at Baix das Pedras. And this year we actually are building, thanks to a donation from Disney Conservation Fund in Houston Zoo, where we were able to build our own accommodation for the project. So now we will have actually proper, really good accommodation. So that's really exciting, because once again, John, we hope to continue this project for the next 10, 20 years. That's the only way we'll answer those questions, such as well, how long do they live, and these kinds of things.
Yeah. So Arnaud, I know you've just started a project on armadillos and honey that looks really exciting. Can you tell us a bit more?
Well, yeah. So when we were doing the research in the Cerrado Mato Grosso do Sul, the state where I live, to try to discover where armadillos were still found, so it was a whole random sampling of native areas, etc. We heard this rumor that giant armadillos were destroying beehives, and so that didn't really make sense. And so we worked with some beekeepers, and they told us that yes, this did happen. And so we placed some camera traps and video camera traps, and we documented, yes, indeed, giant armadillos have learned to knock over beehives, and they don't feed on the honey; they feed on the larvae, the bee larvae. And so that's a huge problem because the Cerrado is so fragmented. Our research then showed that there are only 69 fragments of more than 25 square kilometers that are suitable for giant armadillos. And beekeepers, they place their hives at the edge of these areas with native vegetation. And so we interviewed about 200 beekeepers to learn about this conflict, and found out that yes, giant armadillos are the second biggest threat to their livelihood, the first being pesticides. And so that's how we created this new project called Armadillos and Honey, where we documented and tested with beekeepers mitigation measures. So raising the hives above 1.30 meters to 1.50 meters, fencing, using electric fences, so preventing giant armadillos from knocking over the hives. And so that means that beekeepers can then coexist with giant armadillos. And so, but we wanted to do it in a way that our beekeepers benefits from the presence of giant armadillos. So we provide this certification. So we worked with this American NGO called Wildlife Friendly Network Enterprises. And so we created norms and a contract that was government approved, etc. So that took 2 or 3 years to get approved and work. But now, at the moment, we have over 100 beekeepers that have been certified, and you can find in our supermarkets giant armadillo friendly honey, and it's been having a big success where this honey is being purchased a little bit more expensive, and so we're really proud of this project. The next step of the project is we've realized that medium to large size beekeepers are benefiting from it because they bottle their honey or sell it to be bottled. But small scale beekeepers, they usually bottle their honey in a very homemade kind of way. And we only give the certificate if you have the sanitary inspection logo done, right? Permissions. So those people can't really do that. So now we're at the moment, right now we started breeding these queens that are these improved queen bees. So, and we donate them to small scale beekeepers so that they can increase the productivity of their hives. So the small scale beekeepers were implementing mitigation measures to prevent giant armadillo attacks, but they were not benefiting from the presence. And now, when they receive these queens, they will be benefiting from coexisting with giant armadillos. And so it's really exciting where now we are seeing beekeepers really proud of coexisting with giant armadillos, proud of the giant armadillo. And so it's a real success story, and we're really excited about that. And beekeepers are really our allies because they want to protect habitat. They need native habitat to have native flowers to provide honey, and the giant armadillo needs that. And so it's really been a great partnership, and it's a great success story. And if anybody is listening to this and wants to get in touch with me, because we would love to find ways of exporting this honey, we now have one of the producers that has got all the sanitary licensing to be able to export. We just need people interested in buying this. So get in touch with me if you want to buy giant armadillo friendly honey. It's really good.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly put a note about that in the podcast notes, but I'll also share that on social media and let people know, because who knows, there may be a honey shop owner somewhere out there who's a mammal watcher that we can hook you up with. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful project.
Now, anyone who's met you in the project knows how generous you are with your time and knows how positive you are. And I think anyone who's watching this or listening to this will get a sense of that too. And so you've been extremely generous when mammal watchers have come to visit. Do you think mammal watching can help conservation?
Absolutely, because often local people do not realize the value or the incredible species that they have. And then when they hear of some crazy person coming from so far away just to see the giant armadillo, that really surprises people. And that brings a lot of value. Oh my goodness, if this person has come from so far, then this must be important. So I do certainly think that the mammal watching and the mammal watchers has helped contribute to the status of giant armadillos at Bahia das Pedras. But the owners now know what a special species it is, and they highly respect it. But we have certainly enjoyed welcoming mammal watchers throughout the years. And I don't think we've ever let any of the mammal watchers down. Up until now, every mammal watcher that has come, we have been able to show them a giant armadillo. And I can't say the same for everybody, but that's usually because these mammal watchers are usually, well, as you know, John, they're kind of intense. And so
no, I hadn't noticed.
There are these usually very intense people that don't mind staying up at night, the whole night, and going through doing everything with us. And so they're very hardcore. And so that's usually a lot of fun. And we are able, so usually we ask them to stay at least 4 or 5 nights at Bahia das Pedras to be able to guarantee a shot at trying to see an animal. And up until now, we have been successful. But these guys usually put in a lot more work than the average tourist, right? They really will stay up as long as they can. They are often very keen to participate in the work with us, or whatever, even if we're just checking camera traps or anything. And they're usually a lot of fun because they have some really fun stories to tell.
Oh, that's good to know. That's fantastic about that 100% track record. That really is for such a hard species. That's just exceptional. We all salute you, Arnaud.
Yeah, really. To do that with the rare species. I mean, I had 100% track record of showing people, but I was showing them elephants. Okay, so.
But we show them animals that are being tracked. So usually, often what we do, they will write to me or a member of the project months before, and so we will try to program a recapture, or we will spend several nights on an animal that we know, waiting for it to come out of its burrow. So we will see it from very far. So that means often being very uncomfortable and waiting for hours, and often mammal watchers don't mind these kinds of things. But the key thing is that mammal watchers usually tell us way in advance, right? So that really helps us to program the kind of work we're going to do, how we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I remember I didn't. I just sort of rocked up, and you were extremely generous and such a wonderful host. But you did say, "Oh, if only we'd known a bit earlier, we could have really made sure." Of course, at that point, I became rather stressed, but it all came good in the end.
Well, because we understand, the costs and the expectations of coming from so far. So we really want to make sure people have the best possible experience. And you say being generous with your time. I think anybody who has something that they really love, it's always a pleasure to show a species and an animal that you're so in love and passionate with, and it's wonderful to share that passion with somebody who's also really keen and understands you. So somebody who will not label you as crazy. That's wonderful.
I completely second that. When people would come to see the elephants out in Tarangire, you take them out and there was that tremendous joy when you would put people right up next to an elephant, etc. And you start seeing it through fresh eyes again, because that work was just what we did, right? It was just our daily job. And you sometimes perhaps get jaded, but you'd forget how wonderful and special that was. And so taking someone out and seeing that enjoyment and that pleasure, it just reminds you that, yes, indeed, what we do is wonderful.
But Charles, I barely get to see giant armadillos. I listen to the beep of a telemetry device. I see them through camera traps, but I don't get to spend time with them unless we capture them. So for me, even after all these years, every time I see one is an extraordinary event.
Wow,
Um,
cool.
but so for me, it's still I still have that childlike fascination. And my heart beats faster, and I sweat profusely when I'm close to them. I just think it's amazing. So, but I also think what's great with mammal watchers and just with people who are passionate about wildlife is it's so good and nice to be able to spend time with people who share your passion, and it makes you feel that perhaps the world has a chance. Perhaps all this doom and gloom we hear about, well, if there are more of us, maybe we can make a difference. Maybe, and it's just so good to hear people that share your concern for wildlife, your fascination for different species. I think that is really refreshing and so important to get that, because so just like John, I don't know, my kids are teenagers. I think, John, yours must be a little bit beyond that now.
One's 18 and one's 22. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Mine are in like they're teenagers. They spend so much time on their phones, and so many experiences that are virtual. They like the field and they're interested, but not like when they were little. Now they prefer spending time with their friends. But I'm so concerned about like just when I see their friends and everybody, that nature deficit, right? The whole everything becoming such a virtual world, and it kind of scares me. And so it's always reassuring when you see that there are other people that are just crazy about wildlife and nature.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I also find it's very reassuring when you can go to almost any part of the world. You can be in the most remote spot, and when you meet someone else who's a tracker or an indigenous person who's into the wildlife, the joy in their eyes when they see the joy in yours, it's universal. And it really makes me feel the human race is so connected.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter our background, what we do, where we come from. At that point, we're bonded by this species. And so, it doesn't matter if the person is a CEO of a huge company or some other job. We are so equal and so connected and share a similar joy. It is wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, both having pleasure seeing the same animal. Yeah. So Arnaud, your giant armadillo project, you've done amazing work with it, and it's extremely well known. And yet you weren't satisfied with that. You decided to start up yet another project of another incredible mammal, the giant anteater. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you started that and what the project does?
So the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program started in the Pantanal, where we try to study the ecology, biology, and get this long-term data on giant armadillos for conservation decision-making. And we work on one threat, which is fire, with the community fire brigade. We then expand to the Cerrado, where we're working on habitat loss and try to ensure viable populations of giant armadillos by reconnecting fragments. In Mato Grosso do Sul, there are only 69 fragments that are over 25 square kilometers that have giant armadillos. We also did the Armadillos and Honey project, where we are certifying beekeepers that coexist with giant armadillos and use mitigation strategies to prevent giant armadillo attacks on their beehives. And then we work in the Atlantic forest in the last population. So that's the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program. But then when we also started to work with giant anteaters, and in this case, differently than giant armadillos, this project is really focused on one threat, and that is wildlife vehicle collisions. And that's just because, and John, I don't know if you remember that, if you take a road in Mato Grosso do Sul, where I live, you will see carcasses of lots of wildlife. And in particular, giant anteaters are the third most killed animal on our roads. And so we decided to do something about that. And so this became started small, but became pretty big, where we did road surveys, studied populations in 3 different areas, worked on wildlife health at the same time, did a camera trap study close and far from the road, and used all that data to start, trying to change public policies. And so working with local authorities. And so we now have a manual for mitigation measures endorsed by the local government. We have a paper coming out just this week showing exactly where all the different hotspots for tapirs, capybaras, and anteaters are throughout the state, and really pressuring public authorities to do something about this threat. And we don't talk about roadkill, we talk about vehicle collisions. And so our lemma and our mantra is to make roads safe for all. So really working with the government, showing them that this is not a threat just to biodiversity, but also to people. People die on our roads. When you collide with a tapir, a capybara, or a giant anteater, people die. Cars get wrecked, there's psychological damage, and we have demonstrated to them. So, it's been tons of work. We've collected over, 15,000 carcasses. It's been, we have all the data, all the science. What we really are working now is pressuring the government to implement the manual that they now endorsed. And we create mitigation plans for the highways. So that's really the threat we're working on. And we work with all kinds of different stakeholders. So we work with truck drivers, where we're doing this whole work with, we have an app that warns them if they're going in a dangerous area. They help to collect data. It's like a citizen science project. So the Anteaters and Highways project is is a whole project in itself. We also maintained one of our populations that we've been studying now for 5 years, where we maintain collars on the females. We track the pups up until the dispersal so that we can see where they're dispersing. So to understand if habitats are permeable, or if what habitats are permeable to the animals, or which ones are barriers. So once again, and now everything's kind of about public policy. How do we influence public policy? Because the losses are just too great. Half of my study area last year was transformed into soy fields, right? There is so much change going on in Brazil, and especially under the last governments, the environmental agenda was not very high, and so we really have to work very hard now to try to protect these species. For what we're really prone is a lot of use of fences. We tested the impact of signage. We're testing different measures, but what really helps is when you have fencing that guides towards an underpass. If you have just an underpass, our telemetry data has shown that only 1% of the animals will cross using the underpass, because they kind of cross opportunistically. If there's not something to guide the anteaters, they'll just cross wherever they want to. And yet, our data also showed that they avoid roads. They're more likely to cross a stream, so a natural obstacle, 8 times more than a paved road. And they're 4 times more likely to cross a unpaved road than a paved road. So they avoid roads, but when they cross them, they just cross them. And then they die. Yeah. Anyway, so we have a ton of data on these animals. And so now it's really about public policy and influencing and trying to make a change. And so, yeah, so hopefully that will have a really positive influence for all species, not just giant anteaters.
Arnaud, obviously you've worked in the forest of Brazil for many years. You must have encountered some other fantastic animals. Can you tell us about some of your favorite experiences?
Well, there are so many different species that are incredible, right? My wife works with tapirs, so I'm always tickled when I see a tapir. But there are some species that are kind of the holy grail, right? And I think, so I've had only just a few opportunities to see jaguars, and a jaguar in the wild is always such an incredible experience. But I've seen a pampas cat, I think only once or twice. Hoary fox, very few times. But I had to say on the top of my list is the bush dog.
Oh,
wow, you've
yes.
seen them.
I've seen it once in the wild, right? And it was years ago. I was walking a transect, and 3 bush dogs came running along the path, and I had my camera. I took it out of the pouch I had, but I could not put it in front of my face because I was so enthralled by seeing these animals. Really, where your mouth is just wide open and you just stare at them. It's really just incredible experience. We get bush dog in our camera traps sometimes. They're still very rare. And actually, I was telling you about the work we're doing with giant animals in the Cerrado. we're working in a small municipal park that has been completely neglected. And we have evidenced several times bush dog there. And so we're trying to get the park much more structured, protected, and valued, because it could be really important for these bush dogs. And the bush dogs that we took up pictures of are beautiful. They don't have mange. One of the big threats to bush dogs is sarcoptic mange, and that's brought by domestic dogs. And these ones, so these ones are nice and healthy. So that's really wonderful.
Oh, I remember we talked about bush dogs when I was there, and I think you said a friend of yours had worked on them and had followed them on his motorbike for like thousands of kilometers.
Yes, there is this project. They stopped working now, but there was this project on bush dogs, and they had done some incredible work. And exactly, this guy, the biologist who was following them, was they had collars, but he was VHF collars. He was really hardcore. He would, have a backpack and a motorcycle and just follow where they would go. And I think their home range is something like 650 square kilometers. I mean, it's huge, huge. And so these are also, I mean, such a rare and special canids that because they roam on such extensive areas, they're rarely seen. They can go extinct without anybody noticing. It's kind of the same story as giant armadillos. And they're linked to giant armadillos because they love to use giant armadillo burrows as a shelter.
Yeah.
Wow. I think John and I are going to suggest, Arnaud, that you perhaps forego your studies of giant anteaters and giant armadillos and just change to bush dogs, will you please?
For your next challenge.
They are incredible.
Did you see that video I shared it on Facebook a few weeks ago? I think it was in Brazil. No one seems to know. It was someone's cell phone, 3 bush dogs taking a packer right in front of this guy. Looked like it was in the Pantanal
I think I saw this. I don't. Yeah, I remember. I saw that video too. Yeah.
Incredible. One day.
They are very, very, very hard to see.
But people see them sometimes. It's just time, I suppose. But if you've spent so long there and you've seen them once,
planning. But once again, sometimes you have to you have to plan, be in the right place. I mean, I didn't see giant armadillos for 8 years when I worked in the Pantanal, but once you start searching for something and dedicate yourself to it, it is much more possible.
There you go, John. You can give up your job at the UN and start.
I'd love to
dedicating yourself to
this bit out.
Bush dogs.
I will see them one day. I'm determined.
Arnaud, I know that a lot of the funding that you get comes from zoos and aquariums, and particularly zoos and aquariums in the US. Do you want to expound a little bit on that?
Yes, absolutely, Charles. I know that both of us receive funding from the Reed Park Zoo. The Reed Park Zoo funds our educators and communicator. But 80% of the funding from the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program comes from zoos and aquariums in North America and Europe. And there are no giant armadillos under human care in North America or Europe. So that just shows the important role of zoos in this conservation work. And almost 50% of our Antilles and Highways project funding comes from zoos. So we get funding, but also so much more. We get 10 members of the staff of our NGO are sponsored by zoos. We get a lot of mentorship, capacity building. We just did for our NGO a strategic planning, and that was facilitated by a person from the Chester Zoo. We get always advice, whether it's veterinary procedures, plans for strategic planning for education or communication, all kinds of capacity building opportunities. This year, for example, I have a member of staff, Marika Tapani, who's visiting the Chester Zoo. Andrea, our educator, will be visiting the Reed Park Zoo, and our biologist, Lucas, will be going to Edinburgh Zoo. And they always get all this training. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to highlight this important role of zoos in everything we do, in the work that we do. And we could not be more grateful to zoos and aquariums in North America and Europe for their important role in promoting our work. So anybody listening to this, if you are interested in conservation, please go visit your local zoo and see how you can get involved.
Yeah, I think people don't realize that zoos pump about $180 million a year into wildlife conservation. And it's something that is not promoted enough, I think. And indeed, there are many, many projects all around the world doing fantastic work, like yours, that receive funding from zoos. And indeed, our project has been funded by the American zoos, primarily by American zoos for many, many years. So they are excellent sources of funding for many of these projects, which otherwise would have a hard time actually getting the resources they need to actually do the work.
Absolutely, Charles, because zoos are right now, zoos are the #1 funders of species conservation projects throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a misconception of the public in general about what the wild is. And so I would say that people who are against animals under human care in accredited institutions should come visit us, in the field and see what the wild is. Of the radio-collared anteaters that I have, I've lost 8 animals through vehicle collisions, 3 giant armadillos due to fires, 2 anteaters due to poisoning by pesticides. The wild is not what people imagine it to be. It's a very tough place. There is less place for animals to be. We have a project in the Cerrado reintroducing giant anteater orphans, and we reach about 5 orphans a year. And let me tell you, it's so hard sometimes. It is hard always to find an area to just suitable habitat to reintroduce these animals, because the wild is not what people think. People have this misconception due to documentaries that everything is beautiful and don't realize that, it's not like that anymore, that, animals in the wild have a really tough life.
They do. That's like some of these naive ideas of people living in harmony with nature. They're actually dying in harmony with nature very often because it's so difficult. Yeah. And I think the other thing, of course, to mention, which we all know here, is that so many people like us, so many mammal watchers and naturalists, when they've been on this podcast, can trace their interest back to visiting zoos as a child. Time and again,
Absolutely,
we've had that.
Yeah.
And for me,
Absolutely.
It was Chester Zoo, actually.
Really?
One of your big supporters. Yeah, Chester Zoo is the first zoo I remember. So I have fond memories.
Oh, that's wonderful. They're such huge. I mean, they support Mariana Catapani, who is the woman who works with the human wildlife she's their coexistence coordinator, and she's actually going to be in Chester Zoo to get more training and share her experience. So it's a really there's so many great conservationists working in zoos with whom we collaborate, and so we learn a lot from and we get so much capacity building from this partnership.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Arnaud, it was so nice to see you again after almost 10 years. It's always fantastic to talk to you and hear what's going on. It's always interesting. It's always inspiring. What can I say, but keep up the good work and find a place for bush dogs. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, John and Charles. It was such a pleasure talking to you. John, I expect you to come visit us again. It's been 10 years, too long.
It's time, isn't it? Yeah.
And Charles, I do hope we meet at a conference again soon. It'd be wonderful to see you again.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Arnaud. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we will run into each other sooner rather than later.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.